I've been staring at my calendar all morning, actually.
Just staring at it.
Yeah, usually it's just this grid of obligations, right? Like dentist at 2, a deadline at 5. It's functional.
It's a tool. It keeps us from missing the bus.
Exactly. But every once in a while, a date stops being just a coordinate in time and, I don't know, starts acting like a magnet.
A magnet. That's a really evocative way to put it. You mean it pulls things in?
Yeah, exactly that. It feels like certain dates have this gravitational pull. They decide to stack up these massive, world-altering events on top of each other, decade after decade, until the date itself just becomes heavy. And today, we are looking at what has to be one of the heaviest dates on the entire calendar.
We are indeed. We're doing a deep dive into February 18th.
February 18th. Now, if you just glance at it, it's a random winter day.
Yeah.
But when we started pulling the threads on the source material for this, it became really clear that this isn't just a date. The sources describe it as this high-voltage node.
A high-voltage node in an unbroken chain.
Right. It's a specific day that serves as a through line for the entire history of Black liberation.
It really is a startling convergence. You're not just talking about a couple of fun coincidences here. You're looking at a timeline that spans well over a century, it touches 3 different continents, and covers really every single method of struggle.
From education to literature.
From armed rebellion to statehood, and finally to music. We've got the birth of Toni Morrison, the founding roots of Morehouse College, the independence of the Gambia.
The execution of Dedan Kimathi.
Yes. And a brutal military raid on Fela Kuti, all sharing this exact same anniversary.
It's the full spectrum. And what I want to do today is not just list these events off like a timeline, but really unpack why they fit together. Because when you see who was born, who died, and what was burned to the ground on this day, it tells a very specific story about the cost of having a voice.
That's the absolute key to all of this. It's about voice and it's about sovereignty, whether that's intellectual sovereignty, political sovereignty, or even sonic sovereignty.
So let's start right at the foundation. We have to go back to the aftermath of the American Civil War. It's February 18th, 1867.
And the setting here is crucial. We are in Augusta, Georgia. The war has been over for barely 2 years. Reconstruction is in full swing, but it is incredibly fragile.
Yeah, the South is just in total chaos.
Total chaos. And in this environment, a group of men, Reverend William Jefferson White, along with support from Reverend Coulter and Reverend Turney, they gather together.
But they aren't meeting in some grand hall or estate building. They're meeting in the basement of the Springfield Baptist Church.
Right. And that's not just some quaint historical detail. It's a tactical necessity. You really have to remember that for the Black population in Georgia in 1867, education was a radical, highly dangerous act.
Because just a few years prior, literacy was literally illegal.
Exactly. So starting an institute wasn't just, opening a school, it was an insurgency.
That's what always strikes me. We think of universities today as these ivory towers with massive endowments and manicured lawns. But this, what they call the Augusta Theological Institute, it started in a bunker, essentially.
It did. And the mission was pure survival. They were training Black men for ministry and teaching because those were really the only 2 avenues of leadership available to them at the time. They were building the infrastructure of an entire community from absolute scratch.
And while the name Augusta Theological Institute might not ring a bell for everyone listening, the institution it evolved into certainly does.
Oh, absolutely. It eventually moved to Atlanta, became the Atlanta Baptist Seminary, then Atlanta Baptist College, and finally it became Morehouse College.
The Morehouse College. The alma mater of Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, Maynard Jackson. It's practically the nervous system of the American Civil Rights Movement.
It really is, and that's why the sources refer to this as the foundation. On February 18th, 1867, they weren't just teaching theology down in their basement, they were establishing the very concept of Black intellectual sovereignty.
They were declaring that Black men had the right to think, to debate, and to lead.
Yes, you can draw a straight line from that church basement in 1867 directly to the March on Washington almost a century later.
It's the hardware. They built the physical institution that would produce the leaders. But, and here's where the date gets really wild, if Morehouse provided the hardware, the structure for Black thought, exactly 64 years later, on the exact same day, we get the software, we get the voice.
We do. We jump ahead to February 18th, 1931, Lorain, Ohio.
The industrial Midwest. And on this day, Chloe Anthony Wufford is born.
Who the world would eventually know as Toni Morrison.
And I love that the deep dive connects these two. Because while Morehouse was about creating a physical space for black men to learn, Toni Morrison's entire career was about creating a psychological space.
That is a perfect distinction. Morrison often talked about the white gaze, how so much literature, even written by black authors, was subconsciously written to explain black people to white readers.
Like he was always playing defense.
Exactly. Morrison refused to do that. She wasn't explaining anything to anyone. She was immersing you.
She called it black interiority, right? The idea that her characters in The Bluest Eye and beloved Song of Solomon, they had these complex, messy, deep internal lives that simply didn't need to be justified.
Precisely. She centered the black experience as the default human experience in her books. And she didn't just do it as a writer, which I think is a part of her legacy people often overlook. She was a powerhouse editor at Random House first.
That's such a huge part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Before she won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993, before she was this global icon, she was in the trenches of the publishing industry.
She was the one finding writers like Gail Jones. She was the one editing Muhammad Ali's autobiography.
She was literally building the canon from the inside out, championing other black writers.
She was doing for literature exactly what Reverend White did for education in that church basement. She was carving out a space where black voices could exist without apology, refusing erasure.
So on February 18th, we have the birth of the institution with Morehouse and the birth of the language with Morrison. That's the intellectual resistance. But history is violent. And the struggle for liberation isn't always fought with books and sermons. Sometimes it's fought with blood.
And that brings us to the much more visceral side of this date. We need to move from the American Midwest all the way to East Africa.
Specifically Kenya. The tone shifts completely here. The year is 1957, February 18.
This is a dark day. We are at the Kimathi Maximum Security Prison. The British colonial government is about to execute Dedan Kimathi.
Kimathi he's a mythic figure even today. He was the field marshal and spiritual leader of the Mau Alpha uprising.
And this wasn't a peaceful protest. This was an armed struggle in the forest. It was a brutal war. Kimathi and his fighters were trying to reclaim their land from British settlers.
He had been captured in October of the previous year, right?
Yes, captured fighting in the forest. To the British colonial rulers, he was terrorist, the ultimate boogeyman.
But to the Kenyans, he was the tip of the spear. He was fighting for their freedom.
He was the absolute spirit of independence. And the British knew that just executing him wasn't going to be enough. They were terrified of his memory.
This is the detail in the sources that always chills me. They didn't just hang him. They buried him in an unmarked grave somewhere within the prison grounds.
They wanted to erase the coordinates of his body so it couldn't become a shrine for the movement.
It's the ultimate attempt at silencing. If Toni Morrison was all about asserting memory, the British treatment of Kimathi was about weaponizing oblivion. They wanted to just delete him from history.
But there's a quote attributed to him right before the end. He viewed his struggle, his impending death, as necessary. He said his blood would water the tree of independence.
And it did. That's the profound irony of martyrdom. The erasure completely failed. Kenya won its independence in 1963, and Kimathi is honored as a national hero today.
But here is where this high-voltage node theory really starts to hum. You have this brutal execution on February 18th, 1957. But then, on February 18th, 1965, just 8 years later, you have the exact opposite image playing out on the same continent.
The Gambia.
Independence Day.
Exactly. While Kimathi was buried in an unmarked grave on this date, the Gambia was raising its own flag. The Gambia Independence Act of 1964 officially came into effect,
Ending British rule. And this was a very different transition of power, wasn't it? It wasn't the forest war we saw in Kenya.
No, it was a relatively peaceful, negotiated transition. Dada Jawara became the first prime minister. It marked the shift from being a colonial object, literally a piece of property owned by the empire, to being a sovereign nation with a voice in the Commonwealth of Nations.
It's such a stark contrast to hold in your head at the exact same time. February 18 is the day the empire kills the freedom fighter in Kenya, and it's the day the empire hands over the keys in the Gambia.
It really perfectly shows the duality of liberation. Freedom usually requires both sides of that coin. It requires the martyr who pushes the system to its absolute breaking point, like Kimathi, and it requires the statesman who actually codifies the victory, like Jawara.
The date captures the full cost and the full reward. It does. It holds both the martyrdom required for freedom and the official recognition of it.
So we've got the mind with Morehouse and Morrison. We've got the body and the state with Kimathi and the Gambia. But there's one more layer to this date, and honestly, this might be the most explosive one we look at today.
It certainly is the loudest.
Because what happens when you get your independence and the new government turns out to be just as oppressive as the colonial one was?
That is the enduring tragedy of the post-colonial era, and that is exactly where our timeline jumps to February 18, 1977.
Lagos, Nigeria.
Enter the black president himself, Fela Kuti.
Fela, the absolute pioneer of Afrobeat. But calling him just a musician feels like a massive understatement. By 1977, Fela was essentially operating as a rival government.
He had his own commune, the Kalakuta Republic. He literally declared it independent from the Nigerian state. He had electrified fences, and he was using his music to launch absolute missiles at the military dictatorship. He refused to join state cultural programs. He wasn't subtle at all. We really have to talk about the catalyst for what happens next, which was his song, Zombie.
Zombie is incredible. It's catchy, it's intensely funky, and it is a savage, unapologetic takedown of the military.
Yeah.
He was calling the soldiers mindless robots who only move when they're ordered to.
You have to imagine the soldiers hearing this blasting from every radio, every club, every taxi in Lagos. It was deeply humiliating for the regime. It was a direct challenge to their authority. So on February 18th, 1977, the military decided to respond.
They sent 1,000 soldiers,
What the
a full battalion.
to a musician's house.
That tells you everything you need to know about the power of art, doesn't it? They didn't send a local police squad to serve a warrant. They surrounded the Kalakuta Republic, and they violently raided it.
The details of the raid are horrific. Residents were beaten, they burned the commune to the ground, they destroyed his instruments, his master recordings, again, an attempt at erasing history, just like the British did with Kimathi's grave. But the worst part, the absolute most horrifying detail of this raid, was what they did to his mother.
Finmalayo Ransom Kuti.
Yes. And we should really pause on her because she wasn't just Fela's mom. She was a titan in her own right. She was a fierce anti-colonial activist, a suffragist, a contemporary of the historical figures we were discussing earlier.
And she was in her late 70s at this point.
She was, and during the chaos of the raid, the soldiers threw her from a second-story window.
Which is just, it's unthinkable.
It eventually led to her death from the injuries. It was an act of supreme, calculated cruelty. They wanted to break Fela's spirit by destroying his sanctuary and his family.
So on February 18th, we see the founding of a sanctuary in Georgia with Morehouse and the burning of a sanctuary in Lagos with Kalakuta. It's like the date is fighting with itself.
It really is. But think about the result of the raid. The state's goal was to silence Fela. But instead, it canonized him. It proved that everything he was singing about in Zombie was entirely true.
The raid basically showed the whole world that the Nigerian state was exactly as brutal and mindless as Fela said it was.
It amplified his status as a symbol of resistance. It solidified his sonic sovereignty. They could burn down the physical house, but they couldn't stop the signal.
And that connects him right back to the unbroken chain.
Exactly. Just as Augusta was an educational base and Kimathi was a warrior in the forest, Fela's Kalakuta was a sonic commune. The state saw his music as being just as dangerous as armed struggle.
Fela's loud refusal is basically the musical cousin to Toni Morrison's literary refusal.
And Kimathi's physical resistance. They are all engaging in the exact same act. Refusal. The founders of Morehouse refused the idea that black men were unteachable. Morrison refused the white days. Kimathi refused colonial rule. And Fela refused to shut up, even with 1,000 soldiers at his door.
It's just different frequencies of the exact same resistance.
That's a great way to put it.
It really is overwhelming when you lay it all out like this. Let's just look at the stack of events one more time because the chronology is just relentless.
It really builds on itself.
1867. The intellectual foundation is laid in a Georgia basement. Morehouse is born.
Right.
1931. The narrative voice is born in Ohio. Toni Morrison arrives.
Yes.
1957. The blood is spilled in Kenya. Kimathi is executed.
It's sacrifice.
1965. The flag is raised in the Gambia. Sovereignty is recognized.
The victory.
1977. The compound is burned in Nigeria. Sonic rebellion survives the fire.
It's a complete ecosystem of history. You have the school, the book, the martyr, the nation, and the song, all vibrating on this one random frequency on the calendar, February 18.
It really makes me wonder about the mechanics of history.
Yeah.
We like to think it's linear, cause and effect, A leads to B. But this feels different. This feels like resonance.
It definitely suggests that time might be more cyclical than we usually think, or at least that certain struggles echo across generations. When those men were sitting in that search basement in 1867, they couldn't possibly have known about Fela Kuti. But they were pulling on the exact same rope. They were tapping into the same energy source.
A line from Black education and imagination directly to African independence, armed struggle, and sonic rebellion. And February 18th just happens to be the node where that energy surfaces most visibly.
It seems that way. It's a day where the barrier between what seems impossible and what becomes inevitable gets very, very thin.
So here's where I want to leave you listening to this. We've spent this deep dive looking backward at this high-voltage node, but the calendar keeps turning.
It always does.
When you look at today's date, whatever it happens to be right now as you're listening, are you just seeing a number, just a day to get through?
Yeah.
Or are you looking for the echo? Because if February 18 proves anything, it's that history isn't just in the past. It's happening right now, in real time. We just might not have the distance to see the pattern yet.
We're living in the nodes of the future, the events happening today, the quiet meetings, the books being written, the loud refusals. They are going to stack up on someone else's deep dive 50 years from now.
Exactly. February 18 was just a Tuesday once, until people decided to make it history.
Keep your eyes open. The pattern is always there.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you on the next timeline.